Hello and welcome to the Women in Motorsports first show of 2025. Formula One Academy is back next week. We have plenty of racing already occurring. I'm Joe Sanriego. With me, we have Emily Sharp and Ben Schneider from Grid Encore. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for visiting in the Grid Network each and every month. You too can invest in the Grid Network. And of course, Super Chat, buy me a coffee. Jason has the lead right now. You could overtake in the leaderboard. We'll thank you on the air or the next time we go on the air if we don't see it while we're on the air or you watching us later on. Let's get started with one of the big races, one of the big years, I think, for Indy NXT that we've all been talking about. Very, very talented field. In that, we have two female drivers. Starting with race one at St. Pete, both drivers finishing on the lead lap. And of course, I'm talking about Sophia Flörsch and Hailie Deegan. I have to say, 1 year ago, somebody told me those two would have been Indy NXT. I would have been thinking, okay, let's see. But both of them, they're in Indy NXT for the entire year. Sophia Flörsch, her first start, 17th place starting position, but she worked her way up to 12th, while Hailie Deegan, 21st, and moved her way up to 14th. 44 laps, 21 cars in the field. 4 cars did not finish due to contact. Emily, overall, where do you believe both drivers are in their progress after one race in Indy NXT?
Well, first of all, Joe, Ben, so excited to be back here talking with you. And most importantly, another year highlighting some incredible badass women. And yeah, kicking things right off with Indy NXT. I feel like we have been having this conversation of what to expect from Hailie Deegan. We've been talking about it on this show for a while now, and it's finally here. We're finally talking about her first Indy NXT performance and not just her transition and guessing what that transition from stock car racing to open wheel racing was going to look like. So I think overall, a solid performance for her. Obviously she's part of team HMD Motorsports, which has 9 drivers part of this series. So she's one of 9 and solidly a good job. She started in 21st up to 14th, as you said, Joe. She kept on pace relatively with the 4 drivers ahead of her. She avoided that major turn 1, lap 1 crash. So I think she has some solid takeaways from this weekend, and overall respectable outing for her. Now, Sophia Flörsch, I'm going to be very transparent about. I have high expectations for her. Overall, with her time here in Indy NXT, I will be fair and say I'm trying to have relatively conservative expectations for her first season out. But giving her a little bit of time, more races under her belt, I think she's going to be one to watch. I'm personally hoping for some top 10 finishes from her this season. So we're kind of laying the groundwork for some podiums and some wins following her in this stage of her career. But overall, first race out, respectable drive from both of these drivers, and definitely want to see them in this series a little bit more before I give you a really hardcore perception of how they think they're doing this season.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to judge after just one race. Obviously, I think we'll have a much better idea as the season goes on here. I have to say, I'm a little concerned with Hailie Deegan's lack of pace. I think being towards the back of the grid was to be expected for her coming into a brand new discipline, something completely different from what she's done the last several years over in NASCAR and stock car ranks. And to her credit, she did pick up quite a bit from practice to qualifying and kept the car clean during the race and came away with, I think, a solid 14th place finish, all things considered, given what it was looking like it might be as the weekend was opening up there with how far off the pace she was. But I think as you see the season go on, obviously she's going to be more comfortable with this style of car, and hopefully that gap will continue to shrink. Sophia Flörsch, like Emily mentioned, obviously comes from an open wheel racing background. So my expectations for her are kind of, I think, what they were for Jamie Chadwick the last couple of years. I don't know that she's going to win a race this season, but I think if you give her 2 years in this series, that would certainly be a possibility for 2026, depending on how well she progresses as the 2025 season goes on. So like I said, I think it's reasonable to expect Flörsch to be higher up the running order than Deegan, but obviously that's, I think, based on the experience that each of those drivers has heading into this series. It's something completely different from what Deegan's done, whereas while not completely the same, there is more overlap between the kind of racing that Sophia Flörsch comes from as opposed to Deegan.
Yeah, for Hailie Deegan, I mean, from the stock cars, off-roading, very, very different. Where Sophia, we know, I still remember from talking to Linus Lundqvist out when we were asking him about Jamie Chadwick coming in and the difference between those Formula cars and Indy NXT. And he's like, it's almost a very different driving style. But once you can master that and you're then just focusing on the racetrack, a lot of potentials. And of course, that next racetrack, that'll be Barber Motorsport Park, May 4th, the next round. A natural road course that a lot of people have compared to a circuit you would find in Europe. So again, Sophia Flörsch, plenty of history racing in Europe, those natural road courses. While Hailie Deegan, now it's going to be a natural road course, a lot of elevation changes, sweeping corners. From somebody that has done primarily ovals, off-road racing, which is of course dirt, been after St. Pete, do you anticipate any noticeable change in pace, either like closer to the front, like potentially Sophia, or maybe further towards the back, where Hailie Deegan, some would say, might be a little bit towards the back, considering this is very different?
Yeah, unfortunately, I still expect Deegan to be towards the back of the field. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily based on it's a street course versus a road course. I think when it's this radically different, the fact that she has some experience on road courses, I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make as opposed to being on a street circuit. You're both, turning right and left. And, the terrain is certainly different in many respects, but it's still such a radical change that I think it's going to take her a while to pick that up and be a long process like we've talked about on this show before. Sophia Flörsch, again, maybe you might see her a little bit more comfortable this weekend. Obviously, it's the second race, so you kind of have an idea of what this series is all about now. But again, like I said, I think it's going to take until we get to the midpoint of the season to have a better idea of what our weekly expectations should be for each of these drivers.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Ben. I think we can expect to see Deegan back towards the back again. I do think it's important for her and her team to be measuring success or accomplishments against herself rather than placement. I mean, if we look at her first test out at Indianapolis, she was dead last in the speed test. She was not at outing at St. Pete. So I think she needs to kind of continue to make these incremental improvements. Will the series, will sponsors, will her team, HMD Motorsports, continue to give her that grace to make incremental changes? I think that's the bigger conversation and the bigger question. If she has 3+ years to kind of get herself up to speed, pun intended, then I think that she has the opportunity to be successful. I like what you said, Ben. I'm not going to be comparing her to Jamie Chadwick, who has all of this open wheel racing in her repertoire, like a Sophia Flörsch does. Again, I'm going to give her grace, like we did last year when we were speculating about all of this, to have more races under her belt. And with that being said, I do agree. In theory, Sophia should have a little bit more comfort going into Barber. So I'm going bold, top 10. I mean, she was so close there anyways after St. Pete, finishing in 12th. So again, key is minimizing mistakes on both of them. Avoid any crashes like they did in St. Pete. And it certainly should be interesting, but I do think Sophia Flörsch will have the easier outing heading into Barber.
Sophia Flörsch, I have to say, top 10 would not surprise me just because of her racing background. If she has a great setup and just a good handle of it, that could happen. The thing I think too is just one of those deals with the car being quite a bit different. And if they're a little bit behind that 8 ball, she will have to fight for the top 10, but definitely just something that potentially on the radar for her and for Hailie Deegan. I know it sounds like a broken record. Complete the laps, gain the experience, gain the track time, because nothing is as valuable as the track time. The simulators can only do so much. If she can finish that, and like you said, Emily, race against herself, essentially just where were we at the beginning to where we are at the end, that's how they measure success. It's going to be very interesting. May 4th at Barber Motorsports Park, second round of the 2025 Indy next season. And all races are on FS1, part of that new IndyCar on Fox deal. So you have FS1, you can't miss any of the Indy Next races. F1 Academy, they'll be back on TV again. And their next race is going to be next weekend over in Shanghai.
That's right, Joe. We've got F1 Academy back for their third season, and Shanghai will kick off 2025, like you said. Of course, last year, Abby Poling dominated 2024 en route to her championship. So if you look at early favorites for 2025, I think we have to look at some front runners from last year in Dorian Penn and Maya Voog. We also have Chloe Chambers, who won last year at Barcelona, but she won't be racing with Haas's support this year. That will be Courtney Crone, who will be a rookie in this series. You might remember her from her wildcard entry in 2024. So, Emily, I'll start with you. Do you think Chloe Chambers can contend with the Dorian Penns and Maya Voogs of the world for wins and potentially even a championship?
Yeah, Ben, of course, as you mentioned, she won in Barcelona. I do also want to call out that she had 4 podiums last year, and she finished 6th overall in the Drivers' Championship with quite a sizable lead ahead of Bianca Bustamante, who was in that 7th place in the overall Drivers' Championship. So I do think it's fair to have her part of this top contenders conversation with Dorian and Maya. And if we've learned anything from last season, is that anything is possible. And not to be the broken record on this topic, but it's just still so unfortunate what happened with Dorian's start of her year with that penalty. And then, of course, the injury that came later in the year. So it really seemed like that was her year. So I'm expecting Dorian to pull an Abby Poling and just completely dominate this season. But P2 in that Drivers' Championship is definitely up to grab. So we'll just have to see if Chloe Chamber has what it takes to kind of take the challenge to Maya Voog, who I think are going to be in your top 3 fighting in that close battle.
Yeah, for Chloe, I think it's going to be a really interesting season because we've seen her W Series. Then she comes over to F1 Academy, has this very stellar year, and she's going to be with essentially the same team again. Going to be racing with them. Now has a second year under her belt. She should have some pretty good races, and I think could be up there with Maya, with Dorian Penn, and overall just contending for those podiums and potential wins. The one thing I'm thinking of mainly will be the consistency. Everyone's anticipating Maya Voog, Dorian Penn to be podium contender every single race. I think Chloe Chambers has the potential of doing that too. To do that, you got to have a good qualifying effort and you got to race smart, just because of some changes that I know we'll be talking about a little bit on what F1 Academy has done. If she could be consistent up towards the front, she has a really good shot. There's no reason why she shouldn't be seen as a potential championship contender. And I think that would be a really great effort to put her up there as contender for other series, potentially looking at Indy Next in the future or Formula Regionals, Formula 3s. So it's going to be a big year for Chloe Chambers. Might be a little bit of pressure just because she knows this is going to be her last season here, but having that consistency will be a big boost in helping her get towards a championship picture.
Well, we talked about Courtney. Obviously, she had that wild card entry last season, so it won't be her F1 Academy debut, but the grid is still going to look very different nonetheless. Drivers back full-time from 2024 include Chambers, Penn, and Voog, but we also have Tina Hausman, Aurelia Nobles, and Leah Block. So of the 17 full-time seats, only 6 are returners from 2024. Joe, when you think about that, does that give you the idea that we might see a big gap between the front runners and the rookies? Will the front runners be the ones that have that experience from last year carrying over?
It's a very challenging prediction to make because one of the big things, you have the 6 teams there, 3 cars in each team. The one exception being High Tech, which of course has the wild card entry. If you're looking at how they've run their teams, they're going to have notes for all 3 drivers from the past year. So I think that's going to close the gap a little bit. One of these rookies could come out and really be, to some people, a surprise that, oh, they're contending for top 5, maybe a podium finish. Because, I mean, with only 6 drivers coming back, there's going to be some rookies scoring points. So I think it's not going to be too much of a big gap. Where the gap might occur are particularly looking at some of the tracks where you're going to have it where the racing is much more spread out. Passing is going to be a challenge. And if this is a track where they've been at before, then you could see more of that gap. But with some of the new stops that they got, excluding Las Vegas, I think is almost in a weight level out the field. And overall, if there is going to be a gap, it might be something we always saw last year where Abby Pulling was just on a league of her own. They just seem to have something special going on. Dorian Pin, Maya Woog, or even Chloe Chambers have that. They're going to separate themselves.
Yeah, not too much to add here, Joe. I agree with you. I do think just in general in any sport, when you have a seasoned athlete returning with rookies, there is going to be some level of benefit. They have training under their belt, they have previous experiences. So I do think that they will have some advantage. Is it going to be a huge gap that we saw like Abby versus the rest of the field just among those returning drivers? Probably not. I agree with you. I think that there is going to be a gap between Dorian and the rest of the field. And I really hope that's not unfair of us to kind of be making these predictions. I think Dorian herself probably has this chip on her shoulder type of feeling where she did not feel like she fulfilled everything she wanted to last season. So I do think that she's coming in with all of this experience, the added benefit of racing last season in this very particular series, and then a little bit of hunger because she wants to accomplish everything that she probably set out wanting to accomplish last season. So I agree with you. I think that going to these other new tracks is going to make things definitely interesting. You have the Dorian of it all. And then the last thing that I will say, personally, I really hope we see Miss Tina Hausman have a better season this year. I feel like she really had some things that were out of her control that caused her to struggle. So definitely going to be interesting to watch. And I think we're going to talk about something that is going to make this season very interesting to watch. So I'll pass it back to you, Ben.
Yeah, well, of course, it's important to remember you only get 2 years in this series, or if you win the championship, that you're not even allowed to come back for a third season or to defend your title. So there's always going to be a lot of turnover in this series, and that will continue to be the case until they change that rule, or as long as this series continues to exist. So we'll keep our eye on how the returners do versus the rookies. But one factor to consider is the new race weekend format and championship scoring. Race 1 will see the top 8 finishers scoring points with the winner scoring 10. And then the second race will have a typical FIA system of the top 10 with the winner getting 25, 10th place getting 1 point fastest lap, and 2 points for pole. The big change, however, is race 1. This is, I guess, a page out of the sprint race book for Formula 2 or something like that. You'll see the top 8 from qualifying inverted in race 1. So if you qualify on pole for the second race, you'll start in 8th for the first race, and of course all the way down you'll start on pole if you're 8th in qualifying. So a bit of an inverted grid there for race 1. So Emily, what do you make of this rule change? Is it a good move to perhaps add some entertainment value? I love entertainment when it comes to stock car racing. What do you think we're going to see from this in F1 Academy this year?
I think we can all agree we love entertainment. That's part of the appeal of why we watch motorsports and love it so much, is because it's so unpredictable. So on that sense, yeah, I think it's going to be extremely entertaining. From an athletic point of view, I am going to be a little bit of a negative Nancy. I'm not quite seeing the benefit from a driver development perspective. The whole basis of this series is to give these young women drivers preparation and help them develop into F1 level drivers that can one day go into that level of the series. So I'm of the feeling that if you were to walk up to any F1 driver today and ask them, "Hey, like, would you want to have an inverted, starting grid based off your qualifying?" I would say almost every single one of them probably would say no, and it's not something that we can expect. So I'm not really getting why this is going to help these drivers develop into that level of racing driver beyond the entertainment value, beyond perhaps the series has to do something interesting to draw in viewers. So again, sorry for being a little bit of a negative Nancy. Curious to hear what your thoughts are, Joe, and I'll step off of my soapbox for a second.
Well, it's a little bit of a similar take, I'll be honest, because I remember, and I think maybe Ben was with me, it was a few years ago, W Series had to race at Zandvoort. We did not see much of the slipstream, and we were talking about should there be DRS added to those cars to ensure we had more side-by-side passing type racing. And it was our old colleague Daniel, I believe, that at the time said the focus is more the driver development, as you mentioned, Emily. Getting them to go to that next level, the entertainment aspect should be not really there. And of course, we're seeing where Formula One, NASCAR, they're really trying to dive more into that, make it where the fans that may not understand just how great it is to see a race where it's purely strategy, someone's just dominating, and that's part of motorsports. I feel that should be more what we're having in F1 Academy, but I get it. F1 Academy, it's a business, they got big sponsors, so if they had to do something to try to make that championship a little bit closer, because Abby pulling what she did last year, just dominating it, no contest, especially when Dorian Pin got that penalty. I could see where they were just thinking, well, how can we make this a little bit more closer? Well, you have the fastest car starting 8th for the first race. If they could work their way to the front, we'll be talking about, I know in the future, Dorian Penn or Maya Woog, or a surprise like Chloe Chamber, or maybe even a rookie. What an impressive drive to drove from 8th to 1st. But then second race, they may have just dominated unless something mechanical went wrong. So I could see where they were thinking of making such a move. I mostly don't prefer that. This is mainly to develop drivers for the next step. Do we really need this? I don't think so, but I could understand where the thinking went with this move.
Well, I personally think Maya Vu got robbed last year. She won the last race at Abu Dhabi. If F1 Academy had a playoff system like NASCAR, she would have been the champion. She would have been able to celebrate that victory even more. I think that's certainly what we need to do to bring more entertainment into this series. I think that would go a long way. Obviously, I'm joking. Encore fans can tell you that first and foremost for sure. In all seriousness, though, we're looking forward to a great season here. 7 rounds, 14 races, and we'll have a champion crowned at Las Vegas, November 20th through the 22nd. This will be well after NASCAR, IndyCar, and ARCA wrap up their season. Although, if Emily, like you said, Dorian Penn goes on an Abby Pulling like run, maybe she'll wrap up the championship a little bit early, and the NASCAR playoff fans will be slightly annoyed that the championship doesn't go down in the last race. But we'll just have to wait and see once we get into the heart of the season here. In the meantime, let's go over to you, Emily, and we'll talk about the beginning of an ARCA and NASCAR seasons on the stock car side of things.
Yes, thank you, Ben. And I feel like you're ready to talk about NASCAR after this conversation.
Let's go.
So let's dive right in. Let's start with the ARCA Menard Series. 2 races into the season, it looks like it'll be the 18 to 28 show. But one driver to watch is, of course, Isabella Robusto. She's racing full-time with Venturini Motorsports. The Toyota Development Program driver has shown a lot of potential. So Ben, bad luck at Daytona resulted in a crash, ending her day early. Last week at Phoenix, a track that she's done well at before, she was also out early with mechanical issues. not quite the start that she wanted. Is it a concern, or are we still early enough in the season for a potential rebound?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned. I will say it is absolutely incredible that through all the chaos that Daytona provides and through all the chaos of a double overtime finish, that 28 and 18 car finished 1-2 at Daytona that way, and then the reverse of that, the 18 and 28 at Phoenix. Just seems like no matter what happens in this series, no matter who's driving those two cars, they just seem to be on another level there. So it's going to be tough for drivers like Isabella Robusto to compete with them, and teams like Venturini Motorsports to compete with them this year. But we know Venturini obviously has a lot of success in this series, and they'll be capable of giving Isabella some good equipment to race with this year. Unfortunately, they were unable to do so at Phoenix, though. She had, I think it was an oil leak of some sort of mechanical issue, like you mentioned, Emily, take her out of contention around lap 20 or so. I think it actually coincided with the competition caution. I remember writing about that in my piece for Brock Beard and lastcar.info this weekend. So anytime, one of these drivers gets featured in my piece for that website, it's obviously because something's gone amiss there. And unfortunately for Robusto at a track, like you mentioned, Emily, where she did run well. I think she finished 6th there last year in her part-time schedule for Venturini. So, coming back to a track where she's had some strong runs before, or one strong run at least. I forget if she ran the West finale last year. I know she ran this combo race last year. You would expect her to have some confidence coming into a track that's more familiar to her rather than going to a brand new track for the first time, like she was at Daytona earlier this season. But yeah, certainly unfortunate. But then again, like I mentioned, this is a top team in the series, and I've got to imagine that while these things do happen sometimes with these cars in this series, Venturini is one of the best in the business, and I think for the majority of races this year, she won't have to worry about that. She'll have a good enough car underneath her to compete for top 10s and top 5s, maybe even some wins at some of her stronger tracks later this season. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and we'll just have to wait and see. Currently today, Robusto is in 19th in the standings, as many from Daytona didn't start at Phoenix. This, of course, includes Amber Pin, who finished 29th at Daytona after 2 crashes. Becca Monopoly finished 26th at Daytona, while Katherine Legge finished 39th after a very early multi-car crash took her out. Now, Legge then went to Phoenix to make her Cup Series debut for the Life Fast Motorsports in a race she called Baptism by Fire. Many were critical of NASCAR's approval process given the lack of seat time that she had heading into Phoenix. Several actually made the case that she would have had a bit different story had it been a road course. But one aspect of the story many are not mentioning is, of course, the quality of the car that she had. Now, prior, the 6 starts Live Fast Motorsports has made in Phoenix, BJ McLeod's highest finish was 27th in the fall of that 2021 year race. It also was the only non-charted entry in the field this past weekend. So with all of that being said, Joe, I'm going to start with you. Considering her equipment, what did you make of Katherine Legge's debut? And is it a sign that NASCAR should revisit its approval process?
Yeah, the NASCAR approval process definitely should be revisited because besides Katherine Legge, you had Helio Castroneves, who is, of course, an Indy 500 champion, legend of that race, come to Daytona, and I would almost say had a baptism by fire too, crash after crash, including, everything that occurred for that team to work on that car so long and then to get caught up in another crash. Just a rough weekend. Connor Steelers, I feel a little bit of a different story. He is making that effort to be in the Cup Series full time. He is racing Xfinity, ARCA. Just one of those deals. He got caught up in a crash. So we're seeing where the 3 drivers that had quite a bit of hype coming in to start a race, make their debut, have crashed out, with 2 of them being essentially, okay, you're a top caliber driver coming straight here with little time. And we got to remember, while Katherine Legge did do some Xfinity Series races back, I believe, 2018, things have changed so much, even in the Xfinity Series, and then she just jumps into this car, the next-gen car. Absolutely very different jump, equipment, And then for Live Fast Motorsport DAB equipment, we just know it's not at the level as the charter teams. Even when it was a charter team and getting more funded, it still was in the back, as you mentioned. BJ McLeod, highest finished 27th. And Katherine, she was running those mid-20s until that crash occurred. Been interesting to see what would have happened had she not crashed. And of course, we had the case of the Wallace that crashed out, Ryan Blaney, the engine issue. Could have been a little higher up, but overall, I think NASCAR has to revisit this. I think, especially with her, Helio Castroneves, I get it. I think this might be an effect from what happened in Chicago when Shane Van Gisberger came in, won the race on his first go. NASCAR wants to see more drivers try that, but we can't just allow, especially after what we saw at Daytona, somebody with no experience on super speedways. It might be great in IndyCar, have that kind of issue. For Katherine, overall, it could have been a very different story, just unfortunate. When you're driving these cars, it's a lot of work. You got a lot of traffic, one miscue, and day could be over. And I think that's what happened for her. And just really disappointed, just the circumstances around it. I know Ben will get more to it because Katherine Legge is a person that has done all sorts of racing, Formula E, Xfinity Series, Indy 500, of course, IndyCar, sports car, very decorated. I really hope she gets another opportunity, hopefully in a road course, and hopefully in a better car too. Nothing against that 78 team, but you really need somebody special on a whole new level to get that team outside the top 20. And I just think it was one of those rough deals that NASCAR, I'm hoping, is thinking maybe we should revisit this approval process.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I hate to say it. I was certainly hoping the best for her. But, I mean, she said it perfectly. It was baptism by fire. It was not a great debut. I mean, I can't sugarcoat and say, oh, she was actually, running up in the top 20 and looked like she was headed for a very strong debut. Of course, she spun out, in the first 5 laps of the race, and then obviously spun again and took out Daniel Suarez in that accident. So it wasn't good. It simply wasn't good. You can't just pretend that it actually was. But I don't think that's entirely her fault. I think it's not even predominantly her fault. I think the fault belongs with what we've been discussing all week, and that is NASCAR needs some sort of standard licensing system or approval process, or at least more transparency in their approval process, because we have had these controversies time and time again. I brought up on the Encore show, I couldn't help but think back to Jennifer Jo Cobb wanting to make her Cup debut at Talladega all those years ago. Obviously, it's fresh in everybody's minds with the controversy with Mike Wallace at the Daytona 500 this year. And then you heard Tommy Joe Martins come out and say this week that he's not approved to run Cup when he has far more experience in trucks and Xfinity than Katherine Legge has. Joe, as you mentioned, Katherine Legge has 5 Xfinity starts under her belt. 4 of them came in 2018. Of those 5, only 1 is on an oval. It was at Richmond with JD Motorsports in 2018. She finished in 28th place. I know NASCAR said that she did the ARCA race at Daytona, but she got caught up in that multi-car, 15-car accident on lap 4, I think. I mean, that's an 80-lap race. Think of all the laps that she was going to run in that race that she didn't get to run because she got caught up in that accident. Think of all that experience that she lost out on. We know she knows how to go fast. Her Indianapolis 500 record is proof of that. She's the fastest woman in IMS history. So I get what NASCAR was saying, that played no small role in their decision to approve her for this event. But I actually like what Parker Klickerman and Landon Castle said on their Money Lap podcast this weekend. I think it would have actually made more sense for her to make her Cup Series debut, obviously at a road course, but maybe even this weekend at Las Vegas at 1.5 miles. Because on 1.5 miles, the cars are more spread out. Not going to sound great putting it this way, but you kind of have more places to hide, so to speak. There's nowhere to hide at a short track. Especially if it would have been a track like Martinsville or Bristol. I mean, I understand the idea of the speeds are lower, but again, with Katherine Legge, I don't think the speed is the issue. Go look at her Indianapolis 500 qualifying runs the last 2 seasons and tell me that the speed is the issue. I don't think that's the issue here. The issue was, this is a hard series, okay? NASCAR Cup is a different beast from ARCA, from trucks, from Xfinity, especially in the next gen era. It is very competitive. She was put in the only car that does not have a charter. with no disrespect to BJ McLeod and Live Fast Motorsports, they're doing the best with what they can. I know they had to sell their charter a couple of years ago, and they've punched above their weight plenty of times before. I think that is objectively the least funded car in the field. I think even if BJ's being honest with you, he'll tell you that they are the least funded operation in the Cup Series, or close to it, of the teams that run part-time without much sponsorship, without much manufacturer support, just as many open races as they can find sponsorship for. It was not a situation where you could look at this and say, okay, Katherine Legge is ready, she's prepared, she's set up for success. We're in an era now where you've got talking heads on Sirius XM NASCAR radio that are saying, you know, I watched practice and it just pisses me off. It doesn't seem like it's necessary. I don't know. I think Katherine Legge would have told you it was necessary this weekend. I think she would have loved to get some more practice time, have 3 1-hour practice sessions going into this weekend. What do we even get 20 or 25 minutes nowadays? We have one practice session. We send them out for qualifying. And then congratulations, you're making your Cup Series debut. We're going to drop the green flag for the race. And I just look at that and I think to myself, you know, it would be so much easier on, you know, these young drivers coming in, but also these experienced drivers from other disciplines like a Katherine Legge or an Helio Castroneves, if we gave them more on-track time to get used to their equipment and these cars in this series that's completely different from what they've previously come from. You know, we went through this at Daytona, obviously, with Helio. This was the first time in several years now that we actually had a practice session before we sent them out to qualify for the biggest race of the year. Think of how much track time, you know, Katherine Legge would have had at Indianapolis the last couple of years. They're on the track. I mean, they used to call it the entire month of May because we didn't have the Grand Prix on the road course. We had practice all throughout the entire month of May. So I don't understand the obsession that some people in our sport seem to have with not wanting more practice time nowadays either. So, you know, I think there are a lot of factors that went into why this was not a very good weekend for Katherine Legge. But I think the driver, you know, I'm not going to absolve her from complete blame. Of course, she made a mistake and it took out Daniel Suarez, and that's unfortunate. I did see that Racer.com article. She reached out to Daniel Suarez, gave him a phone call, and he was very clear. He said, look, you're not the problem. The problem is the approval process. The problem is we don't know what the criteria is for where drivers are allowed to start racing in this series. And Suarez was also very transparent. He said, we all love to see a female driver make it in this series, but the circumstances under which Katherine Legge made her debut, I think it is perfectly fine to have the conversation that maybe she wasn't ready, and maybe we need to take a look at the future here and how we license drivers and allow them to make their debuts in this series, because obviously there's no consistency here. And it seems like, you know, if there is a defined criteria, there's only a select handful of people who know what that is. So it was very unfortunate nonetheless. And I think also just some of the fan reaction that I've seen on social media, and it's still going here even almost a week after the debut happened. Just really unfortunate to see, you know, some of the comments that a lot of fans are making. Of course, that Racer article that I mentioned, apparently there was a fan at the autograph session that just asked her, hey, what lap are you going to crash on this weekend? Fans have to be better than that. There's no place for that in our sport. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, I tweeted that quote from the article. Somebody said, well, doesn't Ricky Stenhouse get that too? Doesn't Kyle Busch get that too from his haters? You know, okay, I don't think that makes it right. You know, it's very frustrating to be a part of this fan base sometimes. And I think that if we use some critical thinking, we could do a better job of separating this is a man's sport, women don't belong here, women can't drive, bullcrap mentality. I'll keep it G-rated for our viewers here, but I think it's unfortunate that we can't separate that from the idea of, let's look at this objectively. Let's look at her resume. She's very accomplished in sports cars. She's accomplished in open wheel racing. She doesn't have a ton of stock car experience, and putting her in an uncharted car on a short track with minimal practice time. I know she got in the simulator, but nothing compares to the real thing. I just think it was a recipe for what we saw this weekend. And unfortunately, you know, yeah, I know she was outside the bottom 5. I think we had a lot of attrition from that multi-car accident, which she did a very good job of avoiding. I will give her that. It could have been worse. It wasn't great, but it could have been worse. And it's unfortunate that some fans are, and a lot of them are doing it from behind anonymous accounts, which just pisses me off even more. If you're going to be that bold, just say it with your face. It's unfortunate that they seem to be taking victory laps and taking delight in her misfortune this weekend. But again, I don't think that's predominantly on the driver. I think it's predominantly on all of the circumstances creating this perfect storm that did not set her up for success.
Yeah, and I just want to, before we wrap up this conversation, kind of double click on something that you said, Ben. If you asked Catherine herself, this is how she would have said or felt and wanted more practice time. I do agree with you. She was not set up for success. But I want to share with both of you and all of our viewers here that Catherine does have a new podcast that she is hosting and inviting, people in her inner circle, in her training circle on. And a big portion of her podcast is kind of documenting and sharing her journey as a racing driver in multiple series this season. She shared her experience leading up to and following her Chili Bowl outing earlier this year. And I'm sure the episode has already dropped at the time that we're recording this. I just haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. She is going to, in great detail, share about what her experience was at her first Cup Series race. I will say, previously, she has shared that she really has fallen very quickly in love with stock car racing, and she described it as this is where her heart has been and leading up to in her driving years and career. So I know should she be given the chance, this is not the last that we're going to see of her in a Cup car. So hopefully that she has that next opportunity, gets back out there and has better set up for the next outing. So thank you so much for your candid conversation, Ben. Joe, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
And Emily, if I can just follow up on one thing I said about the licensing system, because I know we've been through this conversation with Colton Herta and in trying to go to Formula One and being like 8 points short of a super license, despite the fact that he's very experienced in IndyCar and AlphaTauri wanted him. I'm not saying we need something that strict or that flawed like the FIA super license system is. I have plenty of problems with the FIA super license system, don't get me wrong. But I think that's too far on one end of the extreme. I think NASCAR is too far on the other end of the extreme, where they've let things slip through the cracks that probably shouldn't have been. But then they've also used their discretion to prevent things from happening that I think would have been completely fine. Now, I know our friend Matthew Bro shared in our group chat, Mike Wallace was spouting off on his Facebook page again about Casey Mears getting approved. And I think he's just, he's still a little bit salty about what happened. I understand his disappointment, don't get me wrong, but I think Casey Mears coming back to a short track. I understand the idea behind, not approving Mike Wallace for the biggest race of the year, but I also see the other side of it. Mike was one of the best in the draft when he was racing, but he hasn't raced in a long time. Again, I think the way to solve that problem is have more testing and have more practice. And if Mike can show that he's up to speed, then I think it's fair to at least let him attempt to qualify. Again, he would have been doing it with Carl Long's team and the Garage 66 entry, so it would have been a stretch just for him to make the field, but he would have at least gotten to run the dual races and have a shot. I personally wouldn't have had a problem with that. And then you turn around and, you let, obviously Elio Castroneves is very accomplished in IndyCar, but he doesn't have anywhere near the stock car experience that Mike Wallace has, and neither does Katherine Legge, as we saw this weekend. So it does seem like it's very inconsistent, and I think if we had more defined criteria in place, publicly available to not just for drivers, but to the fan base as well, so that we know as we're following along with who wants to come here and be a part of this series, I think it would go a long way in allowing us to have that transparency and preventing situations like we've had to start 2025.
Second, everything you say, Ben, it's just one of those deals where NASCAR has to do something because the one thing, like I mentioned, if it didn't happen with Katherine Legge, it would happen later on. And would hate if it was a big crash at, say, Talladega or something. That could be a whole lot worse. We're going to, of course, be following NASCAR, of course, on all of our Pro Clean Grid tonight, especially if there's any changes with the approval process. With that said, we're running out of time. So let's go into our one shiny moment and encourage everyone watching. Share your one shiny moment, especially a female racer, accomplishment, a big role. Ben, let's start with you to kick off for the first one of 2025. What's your one shiny moment?
Keep an eye on Jade Avedissian. She's part of a Toyota development program. She has publicly stated that she would love to race in the Cup Series one day. I think she is firmly on the stock car path. And she became the first female driver earlier this month to win a Cars Tour race. So well done to her. And like I said, she's somebody that I think you're going to want to keep an eye on not just throughout 2025, but for years to come. I think she is set up for success, and she proved it here to start 2025 in the car store. So well done to her. That's, I think, a very worthy moment of the one shining moment here on this show.
And in the spirit of F1 finally being back, it's, of course, the Australian Grand Prix weekend this weekend and the start of the 2025 F1 season. My one shining moment is going to be highlighting Miss Laura Mueller. She is F1's first ever race engineer. Of course, she is going to be in the ear of Esteban Ocon at Team Haas. So again, just extremely exciting to see that some of these non-driver roles and ceilings to continue to be broken, especially in Formula One, and incredibly excited to welcome her into not only so many televisions as people listen to race audio and race radios this season, but another figure for little girls to grow up and aspire to one day be part of and be part of this element of the sport. So I'm excited to watch her, and obviously Esteban's season this year.
My shining moment is going to be from that first race of the Indy next season. Sophia Flörsch getting that 12th place finish. We know a lot of folks have high expectation of her. She comes here to the United States, and I think she's going to see how the racing here very different than what's in Europe, but also the fan enthusiasm. And I think it'll be really a great experience for her to go out there, get 12th place finish, almost top 10. That is my shining moment from this past month of racing so far. And of course, we got a busy weekend of racing. Saturday noon Eastern, Grid Live pre-race for Formula One, the first race of the year. Our Formula One team are excited to be on the air. Then Sunday, Grid wrap-up. Busy show. We have 9 races going on already. Supercar Series has been racing. We're hours away from qualifying. And then, of course, more racing from the Supercar Series. Then Monday, Ben will be back. Grid Encore on Monday. Then we'll have Grid Tonight on Wednesday, followed by Thursday's NASCAR preview. And we're going to do it all over again, Women in Motorsports, and our pre-race for the next race weekend. Be sure to follow us on social media at Grid Network TV. Subscribe, hit the bell icon, and a big thank you to our investors, calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network. Each and every month you can invest. We'll add your name to the board, and thank you at the beginning and the end of all of our programs. For Ben and Emily, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the races.